I've been working on a video about Challengers, and as you can see, this video is not about Challengers, because my dearest friend, as I was getting ready to go to the bed in the wee hours of the night, texted me about Furiosa being a flop, and in a spree of anger, I somehow opened my Word document, I grabbed my green screen and everything else, and I composed myself to try to put something together to tell him why he's dumb. I'm wearing my suit because I'm in business. Furiosa's opening weekend was this weekend, and it's still not even over, and it's already been labeled a flop. This is something that has happened over and over and over again. It happened with Blade Runner 2049, The Nice Guys, The Fall Guy. Why do I keep loving Ryan Gosling films that don't make money? There's tons of examples. Tomorrowland, John Carter, Waterworld. It goes back all decades of time we've had flop culture, technically. And what's interesting to me is a lot of people try to figure out why Furiosa failed. And I looked at a lot of the reasons, and it didn't make too much sense. I should say, before getting into these, I had a very fun time at Furiosa. I didn't think it was the same high-octane fun that Fury Road offered, but it still gave me that same feel that I thought I'd really never get again in theaters. But here's some of the reasons that people tried to rationalize the Flopiosa, if you will. I saw a lot of people defending Furiosa, saying, oh, it's the holiday weekend. Everybody's going on vacation and doing things. And that could be right, but here's the thing, my good friends, if you go back 1 year, The Little Mermaid made a lot of money.
If you go back the year before, Top Gun Maverick made so much money. If you go back the year before to 2021, A Quiet Place made a ton of money.
And here's a fun statistic to throw at you. Little Mermaid, in its opening weekend, likely made more money than the top 5 grossers this weekend. So if it's not the holidays, maybe prequel fatigue? Now, this is coming off a re-release of Phantom Menace that did really well, and you know, that's a re-release, that's different. But what about The Hunger Games Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes? That made a lot of money, a little disappointing compared to the original Hunger Games films, but it still did 350 plus. Well, you could say there's an appetite for YA films, and they hadn't been fed in that market for a very long time. You could also say it used the IP at the front of the title. I can't stress how silly this sounds in practice, but people care about the thing that they know being at the front of the title. Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, it may mean nothing if you just see the Furiosa part. This happened to Birds of Prey as well. No one really knows the Birds of Prey besides the comics, and that movie changed its title because of this. So I'm not saying it should have been called Mad Max, a Furiosa Saga, but maybe? A point I'll give a little bit of credit to is a lot of people talked about the trailer for this film receiving some negative buzz at the start. Now, I don't watch trailers, so I'm not going to go into this too much, but the first impression you have of a film does matter. And briefly, this is a great example of why maybe you shouldn't watch trailers. I know I want to see George Miller do an action film. That's appointment viewing for me. You don't have to show me anything after that. It also had decently tough competition, in my opinion. Garfield does matter. That's a property kids recognize. So does If, that's doing relatively well for what it is. Imagine you just got out of school and you're under the age of 12. Are you going to see Furiosa with your parents or Garfield? And what's funny about this, at my screening for the film on Friday, there was a 5-year-old there who I don't think was enjoying the film, but hey, he was supporting. Lastly, a thing I didn't see as many people talk about was that Mad Max Fury Road, it didn't do that well. It lost to Pitch Perfect 2 opening weekend, and if you go back to 2015, tons of movies were making buttloads of money. I mean, look at The Martian, look at Spy, like all of these were just releasing and people were seeing them. I think Mad Max gained some popularity points in some people's eyes because it's been so well regarded for almost a decade now. But that doesn't necessarily translate to box office tickets. And one of the reasons you may not know about this is because there were no articles about Mad Max Fury Road flopping. And with that, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Discussing films. Discussing films started in 2016, which is notable because that's a year after Fury Road. I can't tell you when they took over popularity on Twitter and various other places where their links get shared, but at this point, they are probably the most well-known film news pages out there. So much so that I think they've driven movie journalists to operate the same way they do. To elaborate this a little bit further, for anyone not familiar with discussing films, they'll have tweets for films that do pretty well, that they'll just talk about the box office number that it did that weekend. And then they'll have flops that they're trying to engage the people to talk about the flop nature of the film. For instance, Furiosa, when it came out this weekend, the budget was mentioned for the film because, in all likelihood, it might not make all that money back. Same thing happened with The Fall Guy. There's plenty of other examples where this happens. And it drives a ton of engagement because when people see big number and when they see small number opening weekend, they go, oh, that's no good. That's just basic math. And I know a lot of this may seem silly, but I've seen all of these sites kind of change their mantra to talk about these films. The only article I could find about Mad Max Fury Road flopping was an article by The Guardian talking about Tomorrowland flopping, and briefly mentioning that Mad Max Fury Road wasn't doing as well as we thought a global blockbuster would do. And what's interesting about The Guardian article is this was posted the Wednesday after the weekend Tomorrowland released. You know, so the weekend could end, and I'm not about to sit here and say projections are wrong or we should end the weekend, because for the most part, they're usually very accurate at this point. But what I am going to say is, believe it or not, I think this affects general moviegoers a lot. I asked my partner to Google Furiosa just out of general curiosity, and after the buy tickets portion, it was loaded with flop after underperformance article about Furiosa. You know what gets people to the theater? Not that. We're also monkey-brained that when we see a negative headline, we associate it with negativity. No wonder the big successes of this year are Apes and Kong. And I'm not above the general public here. I did the exact same thing with Fall Guy. When the initial flop articles came out, my initial inclination was, maybe I don't need to see this in the theater. But I fought this urge and went and saw the film despite all the headlines that I saw about it not doing too hot. And I had a blast! Additionally, when people talk about movies flopping, specifically in the opening, they completely ignore the possibility of good legs a film can have. Both Elemental and Anyone But You had poor-ish opening weekends, but just kept chipping away to do pretty solid. But you don't get clicks from talking about that, do you? Lastly, we're in a weird place film-wise, and I don't think anyone has a clear idea where we're headed. Remember how I mentioned Tomorrowland being a universal flop back when it came out in 2015? Well, guess how much it made opening weekend? That's right, $33 million, which for 2015 standards is really bad. For now, that's just another Thursday. Just the other day, I was listening to a podcast about movie stars talking about Zendaya and Jennifer Lawrence, and mentioning how Zendaya's Challengers did pretty well, and how Jennifer Lawrence's No Hard Feelings kind of underperformed from expectations of an A-list superstar. And that's all well and good. I love Challengers. That's what my next video is going to be about. But these movies made the same amount of money. I love box office numbers as statistical history for a movie's performance, but I have no clue what is considered profitable at this point. I have no clue what marketing costs. People mention that it's half the budget, but there's nothing that backs that up. In fact, The Hollywood Reporter had this article that contradicts this very idea. I also don't have any quantifiable numbers on how much a movie makes when it hits digital. Flop Guy is crushing it this weekend on VOD while still holding okay in theaters. Does that matter? Am I coping? I don't know. Another confusing thing is when you factor in streaming budgets for films. I mean, there was a new film with J-Lo this weekend that probably cost a lot. Does that matter that a lot of people see it on one of those aggressive budgets that they have? Zack Snyder had his Rebel Moon Part 1 and 2, and he claims more people saw it than Barbie, and he may be right. But like, does this matter for Netflix to gain subscribers? Where's the financial gain? It's not as quantifiable as box office numbers. I recently made the mistake of getting back onto Reddit, and it was interesting reading so many people try to parse and make excuses for why Furiosa is going to do what it did. And most of them can be shot down by other films that had similar circumstances that were completely unaffected. The most common thing I saw from people was, well, movies are just going to be available a couple months from now, So why do I need to go to the theater? Which is factual. Less people are going to the theater now that we've opened Pandora's box of the 45 release day window. But also, Apes did well. Godzilla x Kong did well. Wonka did well. Why didn't these people wait? I don't know the answer to this question. I guess it stinks to end with the conclusion of I don't know. But I bring this up because this should not be what leads the weekend talking about Furiosa. There's so many narratives that could be spun out of this film's release. You could talk about Anya Taylor-Joy's rise to stardom because of a Netflix show. You could talk about Hemsworth's career being better than we thought it would be. Or how nearly 80-year-old George Miller still has the juice to make some of the best action scenes of the decade. Talk about what did work. Talk about what didn't. But that doesn't drive the narrative, I suppose. And that makes me sad. That's the end of this video. Just a real sad boy.
I walk a lonely road.